You mentioned a bit back about being numb and just having like anxiety and depression. Was that just from the expectation in, being in medical school? And when did you have a light bulb moment of like,
Mm,
I've got to
yeah,
figure, like, were you going on a downward spiral, or what,
yeah,
what gave you a bit of perspective to change up
yeah.
your mindset?
Yvonne, some of it, I was just wired that way. I mean, even as a little kid, I was the kid who I was very playful, very curious, always asking questions, always exploring.
Yeah.
And I also wasn't the kid who would be in the center of the party or the center of the conversation. I was always the kid who was kind of like back here and just watching and observing. And what I was doing was essentially analyzing. I developed this ability to just watch and tell stories in my mind and look at how people were interacting and looking how the world was and telling stories and testing them out. And I thought that that made me a valuable person. Like, wow, who was it? It was Descartes, the philosopher, who said, "I think, therefore I am." Right? And so when I studied philosophy, and remember, I grew up in a family of, very well-educated people who valued, the mind, which is part of why my heart was ignored. My feelings were never discussed. So I said, "Oh, I think, therefore I am." Well, I think a lot, and I just kept thinking and thinking. And then the thoughts turned to anxieties and fears
Mm.
and worries and these manufactured stories about, what would this person think of me? What would this boy, this girl, this person, if I said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing, if I didn't look good? And so I really built up this external persona of performance and achievement and perfection that I carried with me for so long. And it was so hard. It took so much work. And meantime, there were all these feelings in my heart that I was ignoring, I was running away from. And the light bulb moment for me, a light bulb moment for me, there were many light bulb moments. But for me, the light bulb was when my best friend, who was the one person who helped me actually ask for help from a therapist when I was recognizing that it wasn't just anxiety, it was depression 15 years ago. I was miserable, miserable, going to work each day, seeing 2 to 3,000 heart patients, helping them, but they didn't know that on the inside I was totally numb. I was hoping to just get through each and every day. And I'm not proud to admit that, but I need to say that because that's what about 10 to 20% of our healthcare providers are feeling right now. And in order to fix this system, we have to call it out. And some of us have to start telling our stories. And so the light bulb moment was the one person who was helping me actually get courage to say it's okay to ask for help was my sister Andrea. She was a few years older. She was in her 40s, and she told me she had some blurring of her vision, and she had gotten new glasses, but it didn't help. And then the irony was that she was a doctor as well. She was a radiologist, so part of what she does is read scans, and she eventually was sent to have a brain scan, and she saw in front of her her own brain, and she saw that there was a tumor the size of a golf ball in a place where no surgeon in the world could touch it. So that was the beginning of years of tremendous grief on top of anxiety and depression while trying to be a newly married husband and young babies at home and patients showing up at the door, and life was literally, I was crying on the floor, balled up, of my New York City apartment, and my wife just looked over me and she said, "We're going to make it through this," and I had no idea how. I know that's not the light bulb moment you're looking for, but that was the moment before the light bulb.
I think that's a huge light bulb moment. I think,
Yeah,
firstly, I'm sorry for your loss.
thank you.
Um, Gosh, every now and again, I get a little dose of perspective. I get a little dose, like I'm going, going, going. I'm
Mm,
working as a lawyer. I'm doing a podcast. I'm trying to sell my brand and my boxes, and then I
mm,
hear, oh, someone that's not that much older than you now got a brain tumor,
mm.
and we just think, we never stop to think, like, we know that we're going to die. We
Yeah,
know that someday we're going to die, but when we're 40 or in our 40s, we don't think it's then.
yeah.
And I always think this, like, that's why it's so important to do what gives you purpose and meaning. So does that bring you on to like going through kind of therapy and then your creative side, your outlook? Because I know for my, like you were going through a lot. You had grief. Not only did you have grief, but parents losing a child,
Yeah.
potentially a mom. Was she a mom?
Yeah. Yeah, she was a mom of a young child. Yeah. Yeah, and my mom was a mom, and my mom was devastated and never recovered from her grief at the loss of her daughter. Uh, Andrea, I mentioned I think I'm one of 7 children, and Andrea was kind of like the spiritual one, the beautiful soul, the one who always would stop and tell us all to, hey, look at the beautiful flowers over there. Look, just smell the beauty around you and see it. She was a photographer and an artist, and so my mom was devastated, and was just never the same, quite honestly. And so the experience of her own son, and I won't go too much into other people's stories. Those are their stories to tell, but also my own mother and my siblings, my 5 living siblings around all of this was it was quite devastating, but it was also quite enlightening and illuminating because I asked myself, I said, as I, so I went through therapy. Yes, I spent a year in therapy dealing, even earlier before she was diagnosed, working on anxiety and what was I afraid of and where was the sadness coming from, and a lot of habits of mind and heart that I had to unlearn. And after she passed, I discovered meditation and mindfulness and went on week-long silent retreats at Buddhist monasteries with no talking and all this, and eventually went to Oxfordshire in the UK to become a mindfulness meditation teacher to help others in the way that these practices help me. And then I discovered the practices around compassion and self-compassion. And then I figured, well, I'm a heart doctor. How can I help the people in the spiritual space who are doing these practices understand how it's working? And so I dove deep into the actual literature. I read hundreds of scientific papers on, well, what's happening when we're practicing mindfulness? What's happening when we're practicing compassion? What's happening when you and I are having a deep empathic connection? What's happening when you and I are in a community of people, a group of friends or family, where we can feel the love in the air? What's happening in our hearts? And so for me, Andrea's loss, Andrea's death, had to take on some larger meaning. And for me, the larger meaning is, how can I bring her legacy with me? She saw the beauty in the world and she was able to connect with anyone and to show it to them. How can I do that? And so my work is really dedicated to her and what she taught me and the rest of my family, and obviously to my mom and dad and all the wonderful people in my life. And for me, that really makes it so that I can't stop sharing these messages and staying curious about what is the connection between our minds and our hearts, and how do we live well, and how do we open our hearts and connect them with others.